And we're live. Welcome to Tea with Mimi. I'm so delighted to be here with my friend and amazing colleague, Troy Peters. Troy, good evening.
Hi there. Good evening.
Thanks so much for coming on. And I just want to welcome some people who are listening live. And this does stay up as a video if someone joins it late or wants to share it. This is the live stream show that I started in the darkest days of spring 2020 during the COVID lockdown period, as just very informally playing solo flute music and talking about it through my phone, and was really grateful for this way of connecting with audiences at a time when we were not performing. And then kept it up with the addition of this StreamYard software to be able to have guests and making it extra fun and continuing it because we get to talk about music, share some recordings with you, answer your comments, and I hope everyone says hello this evening as they join, and we really welcome your questions too. So before we get down to the actual program itself, Tea with Mimi did start kind of in the afternoon with usually tea or coffee, but you know, it's evening in some places. Troy, what do you have today?
Well, okay, I will admit there's a little bit of ice in this dark liquid, which is bourbon and Diet Coke, because it is kind of getting towards happy hour. So,
Absolutely. That sounds delicious. I am sticking with some tea right over here. I have a Twinings herbal tea. Maybe that's a little boring, but it's delicious. It's a chamomile honey vanilla one. So here we are. And hello, friends already. Thomas Piercy and Victor Coco and Fred Emery. Good evening to you. And yes, do let us know where you're listening from. Fred is in London, Ontario, Canada. Let us know what you're drinking as well. And now I'm going to officially introduce my guest for this evening, Troy Peters. He is a conductor and composer. And I love this quote. I'm going to share a quote from the San Antonio Current, where Troy was described as consistently brilliant and impossibly cool. I'd have to agree.
My children don't necessarily agree, but
No, I think you're pretty cool. So Troy Peters is music director of YOSA, Youth Orchestras of San Antonio, and director of the UTSA Orchestra, that's at the University of Texas, San Antonio. He is formerly resident conductor of the San Antonio Symphony and has appeared as guest conductor with numerous orchestras, including the Oregon Symphony, San Antonio Philharmonic, Vermont Symphony Orchestra, West Virginia Symphony, and more. He was also music director of the Vermont Youth Orchestra and Montpelier Chamber Orchestra, and has conducted and taught at many festivals, including Curtis Summerfest, where we serve together on the faculty, so we might talk a little bit more about that, and other festivals, including Sewanee and Kinhaven, all state festivals all around the United States. And as I get deeper into Troy's very varied and interesting career, he also has projects of collaborations with rock musicians. And I will have to check my list for some of these. Blind Pilot, John Anderson of the band Yes, and Trey Anastasio of Fish. So that's super interesting. We're going to come back to that. He has been featured in the press many times, including by Musical America and others, made recordings orchestrally of his music, and collaborated with soloists including Branford Marsalis, Midori, Time for Three, Richard Stoltzman, and others. And he's also an award-winning composer. And so we might talk a little bit more about that. Troy, in his training as a composer, studied with the great American composers Ned Rorem and George Crumb, both of whom sadly passed away in the past couple of years, and who I had the privilege of working with as well, not as a composer, as a flutist. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more as the evening wears on. So once again, Troy, thanks for joining us for Tea with Mimi.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for asking.
Great. And we're actually going to just, I think, go right into our first musical sample for today. First, I just want to continue greeting our viewers. Thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing some of what you're drinking. We have to stop for that because Fred is drinking water with apple cider. Delicious. Thomas in Hell's Kitchen, New York City water. Excellent. And Victor, Canada Dry beverage in Southern New Jersey, USA. I love to know what you're having on Tea with Mimi and where you're listening from. We welcome your questions and your comments. And Troy, it's great to be with you tonight to relive our thrilling collaboration. Last October, we performed together. You invited me to perform as soloist with YOSA, Youth Orchestra of San Antonio, in Zhou Tian's flute concerto, written for me as part of our consortium of 7 American orchestras which commissioned the work. And that was also the second performance ever, because I had just a few months before given the world premiere with the Marine Chamber Orchestra of the President's own U.S. Marine Band and director Colonel Jason Fettig. So that's kicked us off. And then I came to San Antonio to do it with you. And we also performed Piazzolla's Libertango. So yeah, I would love to put on a little bit of that. But just the number one thing was, it was really special that you joined the consortium. We were all very proud to have a youth orchestra as part of it. And when everyone hears this orchestra, you can see that the people are very young. Are they all in high school, Troy?
Yeah, almost all high school. A handful of college students and a handful of younger middle school age students, 7th and 8th graders. But of the 90 musicians on stage, about 80 of them are high school students.
It's amazing because you would never know it. I mean, under your leadership, they sound so phenomenal. So it was a really exciting collaboration. I think I'll just put on the opening of the concerto. So this is composer Zhou Tian's Concerto for Flute and Orchestra, first movement entitled Irises. And here it is. Wow, it's hard to stop that, but it's a pretty good place to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really thrilling thing for Yosa musicians to be involved in, for us as an organization to be involved in. Our audience fell in love with Mimi, but our community also fell in love with Mimi. She did a wonderful job of being open to residency elements where we did not just a master class, but also school visits and a really memorable meal with the local university flute professor, Rachel Wolf, who's a wonderful flutist herself. And we got a chance to just hang out and talk shop and just all kinds of really meaningful connections to San Antonio. And of course, it's a really powerful piece. Joe is such a vibrant and colorful composer. And in this piece, he knows you're playing so well. So it's written really beautifully for the flute. And the orchestra music is rewarding and challenging. And yeah, it was a lot a lot of great stuff to be involved with.
Wow. Well, thanks, Troy, for those beautiful words. It was a very meaningful time with you in the orchestra. And in that clip we just heard of Joe Tan's flute concerto, I was just so amazed by the beauty of the sound, the whole orchestra sound, the string color, and then the way the concerto highlights soloists within the orchestra. And your youth orchestra sounded amazing in every way. And I come to it also from having really wonderful formative experiences as a member of a youth orchestra, but especially as youth orchestra brat growing up with my brother, who is 8 years older than me and played clarinet like my mother did, saw her playing, wanted to play. And so we, growing up in Boston, were part of youth orchestras there. I left early, let's say, to go to Curtis when I was 12, so didn't have as much time as Alex, my brother, did, but really great experiences there. And it's kind of can inspire young musicians for life, whether they play music their entire lives or go into it or just go to concerts. So I'm just, so curious about how you found your voice, let's say, as someone who does many things, but also specializes conducting youth.
Well, I grew up in a youth orchestra in Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma Youth Symphony is a really venerable program at this point, and I was there in a real golden age when the music director was Harry Davidson. These days, Harry is at Duke University and also does opera at the Cleveland Institute of Music. But he was a young man who was the music director of the Tacoma Youth Symphony when I was in middle school and high school, and he became my primary mentor. But I've always had kind of an administrative mind too, and an organizational. I think about organizational structure. I think about how to get things done in a community a lot. And so I had a great mentor and the executive director there too, Shirley Getson, who's somebody who was really smart and practical about how to raise money and how to create meaningful programming that connected with communities. Mm-hmm. When I went to Curtis as a composer, but I had an interest in conducting as what I thought of at the time as sort of a secondary element of my musicianship. A few years into my time at Curtis, I was hired to be the assistant conductor of the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra because there was a hallowed tradition of Curtis conductors being the assistant conductor. My predecessors in that job were Miguel Harth-Bedoya and Pavo Yarvi and Robert Spano and Stuart Molina and a bunch of great Curtis conductors who went on to big careers in the larger world of conducting. And when Miguel left, it just so happened that some of the other student conductors at Curtis weren't available or weren't interested in the position. And I had the opportunity to audition for that and become the assistant conductor there. So throughout grad school, throughout my time, the end of my time at Curtis and in grad school, I worked with the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra. So I had done a lot of being around youth orchestras throughout my teens and into my early 20s. So when I got to my mid-20s and started to look for jobs, I had realized by then that maybe conducting was more where my heart was. And it was also a very pragmatic thing that for the previous several years, people had been paying me more to conduct than they had been paying me to compose. And so I thought to myself, well, it seems like I can get paid by doing this. So I got 2 job offers when I was 25, and one was with a professional orchestra, one was with a youth orchestra. The professional orchestra went out of business right before I was going to accept that position. And so I took the youth orchestra job instead and moved to Vermont. And it's been a really good match for me. It's not all that I do, but it is the centerpiece of my career that I love helping young musicians fall in love with this art form. And so throughout my career, no matter how much I work with professional orchestras, no matter how much I work with universities, the youth orchestra world has been kind of my bread and butter. And both in terms of my professional life as a musician, and also in terms of I've become somebody who does a lot of consulting and working with colleagues on strategic planning for youth orchestra, programming for youth orchestra, and kind of policy questions for youth orchestra. How do you develop a successful program that maximizes the experience the kids can have? So these days, I'm fortunate that I'm guest conducting a lot of other groups, and I'm working more and more with pros over the last decade, and I love that. But quite honestly, nothing beats leading a great youth orchestra through their first performance of a Sibelius symphony. Just on Sunday night, we did the Sibelius Second Symphony. No one on that stage had played the piece before, and so in effect, it's a world premiere for the whole orchestra, and that is a thrilling thing to stand in the middle of. So I'm very fortunate.
That is, well, really a great personal story, how you came to do what you do and do it so well. But just, yeah, I heard some clips of that Sibelius, and yeah, it sounded fantastic. But speaking to your interest in organization, something I can relate to as founding artistic director of Dolce Suono Ensemble, that part of it, right, is very important. Making an arts organization, bringing a mission to reality, but also I saw when I visited you in San Antonio just what really rich connections your youth orchestra has in the community. So the residency parts were really fun. We visited those two huge high schools, maybe like 3,000 student high schools with really big band and orchestra and choral and mariachi programs. So yeah, I think it's great how you go in to reach even younger people, and even, you know, younger than that, as a way of exposing to music, and then maybe bringing into the YOSA organization that way. And also just in terms of me coming and visiting with you as a Spanish speaker, it was really fun to build those connections too, because I know you have a lot of Spanish speaking members of your orchestra and families with kids in the orchestra, and it seems like you do a lot with Latin music as well.
We do. I mean, I think wherever I've been, one of my real priorities has been the idea that you have to offer something that's meaningful to the people in the community in which you live. And obviously, when I was at Curtis, my training was very focused on making great music at the highest level possible. And that is still the core value for me, that I want the young musicians I'm working with, or the pros that I'm working with, to deliver powerful, compelling performances of great music. But the reality is we live in a world where anybody who's interested can go and hear Carlos Kleiber conduct Brahms or Beethoven. And so what do I bring to the table? There's the power of live performance being different, but I think there's also a real, it's incumbent upon each of us to ask, what can we do to create programming that is unique, that our audiences can't get by just going to YouTube or going to Apple Music or Spotify or whatever. And so some of that is in repertoire selection. Some of that is in how we frame the music, what kinds of collaborations are involved, and how music is presented, and all those kinds of things. And I think it also depends on how an organization works. You know, who are your board members, and who are your donors, and what are the values that you're trying to live into the world? And so here in San Antonio, it's very different than the set of values that we were working with in Vermont. It's a very different community. In both places, we've done really powerful and important things, but it's been about trying to listen to the place we are and think, what is San Antonio about San Antonio? How do we be more puro sananto, as we say, and make this be the thing that is about the place we are? And so, you know, sometimes that means the local folklorico dancers are part of what we're doing. Sometimes it means we're working with local classical musicians or local painters, or, you know, sometimes it means it's about where the venues that we're choosing are, or the school partnerships, or all these kinds of things, about trying to have more people stumble upon us and kind of broaden their own experience of what it means to be here.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because you sent me a track of Gina Serra's music with some baile folklorico. So maybe we should listen to that. Do you want to introduce it at all, Troy? This is
absolutely. This is this has a personal meaning to me, because when I was 14, I think, I saw the Victoria Symphony from Victoria, British Columbia, came to Tacoma, my hometown, and played a program that included a bunch of music. But the thing that really blew me away was the 4 dance episodes from Estancia by Gina Estrella, which to me was some of the most bananas, powerful, exciting, energetic music I had ever heard. And it completely, it's a composer I had not even heard of at the time, completely transformed my sense of what was possible with an orchestra. So when I was planning to do that with the youth orchestra here, we were also putting together a collaboration with Guadalupe Dance Company, a local ballet folklorico troupe that does great work. And they said, oh, can we also do something for Estancia? We'd love to create original choreography. And so they created choreography to this ballet music in the style of ballet folklorico, but that references the elements of the original ballet story. And it's, I think, just really powerful. And it was so fun to have this collaboration with folks here in this community where we were all learning from each other. It was really, really exciting.
Wow, that's great. It must have been really fun for the kids. And let's have some of that. Let's have some. Gina, Sarah, adding to the stream. Bravo. That's fantastic.
It was one of the things where the hardest thing about the collaboration, which is actually true with a lot of orchestras, is when the dancers show up, it's the orchestra loses focus, right? They're so fascinated by what the dancers are doing. I mean, I have seen the exact same thing happen with professionals, that the minute you have the dancers in front of the orchestra or something cool on the video screen, that it becomes this really powerful distraction. But for our audience, it was this incredibly powerful thing. And we did lots of other stuff with the dancers on that program. It's just a recurring pattern for us of what are the partnerships we can do. And it doesn't mean that everything we do has theatrical elements at all, but it just means we're really focused on like, what can we do that connects the dots with the community. On the concert that you were on in the fall, of course, we did Aaron Copland's Billy the Kid, paired with works of art from a local Western art museum. And so we were able to project over the orchestra specific paintings from a San Antonio collection that related to the narrative of Billy the Kid. And then when we talked to the museum afterwards, they had new visitors because of the concert. We had new people at the concert who were museum patrons who came because of that relationship. And so it's just, it's a great way to just connect the dots in the community.
Absolutely. And just kind of exposing your youth orchestra members to different art forms, right? And interdisciplinary things with dance, like we just saw, which was fantastic. And then art, I really enjoyed after I performed with you, then I went out in the hall and enjoyed the Copland with art projections. So that was really nice. We're getting a few more comments. Efraín Contino Argüelles, thank you for your lovely comment. And Victor Coco commented on, wow, such a large orchestra. And it is. It's a very big program. And I think that's only the top group of many different ensembles as part of this Youth Orchestras of San Antonio organization, which is really neat. And then Linda Schwartz Hirschman, delighted to see. Oh, thank you for your comment. Yeah, so nice to have you here, all of you.
The youth orchestra has 9 different groups with just under 500 musicians at this point. And so we have everything from tiny little kids playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, all the way up through this most advanced orchestra, which at its best plays at a really, really high level. And we have a wind ensemble, we have a flute choir, we have we are actually about to start our own mariachi group. There's such a wonderful richness of mariachi programs in schools in San Antonio. And so going into next year, we're going to be launching a Yosa mariachi ensemble, which I'm really excited about because it's something people have been asking about for years. So,
oh, wow, that's so nice. And I was delighted to coach some of your talented orchestra members along with the university flutists in a masterclass on my visit and just kind of get to know the community a bit. But one thing I love that you said, Troy, was how for the members of this youth orchestra, Sibelius 2, one of the very many often performed symphonies, very well known, very loved, is a world premiere. And that's really great because throughout our careers, we try to capture that freshness of the first time we heard something or the first time we played something. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it was really adventurous that you joined the consortium with Youth Orchestra of San Antonio to do with me Jotian's Flute Concerto, because it's a brand new work. And for students who don't always play new music, I know it was challenging. And so many students came up to me after the concert and asked me to sign their music. And of course, had Joe been there, he would have done that as the composer, but it was really thrilling. And they all had favorite movements. And we really talked about it, just kind of going in depth into that new music experience. So I think it's great you provided that for the youth orchestra members. And I guess I would just a general question about how do you program? Like, are there certain symphonies you want everyone to play in those years? Is it a Beethoven? Is it a Brahms? Is it a Mozart, Sibelius, Tchaikovsky, or yeah? How do you make that sort of mixed diet for them that will enrich them?
I think honestly, the programming for any group, there's always this problem that there's more music than you can get to. And there's this dilemma of, I've only got X concerts and I've got all these things I want to squeeze in. For youth orchestra, that's even more acute because we have 3 major programs each year of classical orchestral repertoire. And so in those slots over the course of say 3 or 4 years, I'm trying to rotate through as many of the kind of major tent poles of the repertoire as I can. Realistically, I can't have someone, even if someone's in the orchestra for 4 or 5 years, they're not going to get a complete sampling. Just like with an undergraduate education, you're not going to get a complete sampling of the repertoire, but you can certainly touch on different time periods, different nationalities, and those kinds of things. So yes, I have a little spreadsheet I use to sort of make sure that every 4 or 5 years, I haven't gone more than 4 years without doing a Beethoven, a Mozart, or those kinds of things. That said, I will admit to you that the older I get, I've always been interested in unusual music and contemporary music because I'm a composer. I've always done a little bit more, a little bit higher percentage of things that might be considered on the fringes of the repertoire my whole career. But it is true that I do that even more today. I feel like for me as an artist, I feel like I have an obligation to represent the backgrounds of the students I'm working with. And before I came to San Antonio, I'd done very little Mexican music. I'd done a little bit, but not a lot. And since I got here, I've done a lot more Mexican music. And quite honestly, both in the youth orchestra and at UTSA, the university, I have students asking me for more music by Mexican and Mexican American composers. And because they respond really powerfully, not just Mexican American students, but students in this multicultural community respond really powerfully to connecting with that element. So so it's a process of looking at what are the tent poles. When I look to next season, for example, we decided early on that we wanted to do Rhapsody in Blue for the 100th anniversary of Rhapsody in Blue. We're working with pianist Michelle Can, who's another Curtis alum and a faculty member, on a partnership around that. We'll do the Rhapsody in Blue with the Florence Price Piano Concerto. And then that led to, okay, what else goes with that? And we're doing Jennifer Higdon's Cold Mountain Suite. We're doing Bernstein Overture to Candide. Respighi's Pines of Rome is one of our big tent poles next year. And so we program around that. There's a bird song in that. Let's do a program with animal themes. And we commissioned a bunch of composers to write music inspired by animals in the San Antonio Zoo. So we'll have a diverse group of new composers writing about animals in this community, and then have this landmark that has a connection to the natural world in a different way. So there's a lot of that, of like, what is, okay, if we're going to do Sibelius 2, what's that piece about? And how can the rest of the program reflect that musically, or often extra musically? Because I find the extra musical connections are more meaningful to my audience than pieces that have a similar set of musical proportions or use a Neapolitan sixth in the same way. Like, that doesn't mean as much to my audience as things that have some kind of an extra musical theme. So.
Well, it's great to have that variety of styles that can really appeal to different people and just give them such a broad range of exposure as you're doing, which is great. And it's lovely you're having pianist Michelle Can. We were on a tour of Latin America together that went virtual because of the pandemic for Curtis. So another member of the Curtis family of alumni, like we are together as well. So that's really nice. While we're talking about some Latin music or the Latino heritage of so many residents of San Antonio, I guess we'll skip to Argentinian music, or the Piazzolla that I played with you. I was really delighted to do Astor Piazzolla's Libertango with you and the orchestra after we performed the Jotian concerto, especially because there was a lot of improv in it. I got to do alto flute and piccolo. So there were definitely pop elements within this really nice arrangement by James Kessler. So maybe we'll just sample a little bit of that.
And I just want to say before you play it, Mimi, one of the things that I was so impressed with is that we had very little rehearsal time to get our percussionists to improvise with you in the opening. And you were brilliant at leading them through that process of, how do they respond to you and how do they play? So for the viewers to know that the opening, the percussionists are improvising, and it was a process that they learned very quickly of kind of, here are some ideas of how to respond to what Mimi's doing. And, I stood there and kind of mediated it a little tiny bit, but it's really about you interacting with those kids in a really meaningful way.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that. And I think at our rehearsal, didn't you jump to the percussion section and do some stuff you picked up some instruments? And
I did a little bit, because I'm always unafraid of demonstrating things, even though I'm not a great percussionist myself, but I have enough basic knowledge to be able to sort of show them phrase shapes or get them to explore some colors that hopefully get them to be a little bit less stiff or a little more free in what they're doing.
They did great. So yeah, maybe I'll play a little bit of that sort of atmospheric improvisatory opening, and then we'll go to some of the more cooking parts later of the music. That's not it. Hang on one second. Okay.
That was a little callback to the Jotian concerto.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh boy.
This is how you know it's really live, everybody.
Absolutely. Okay, here we go. We have 2 rows, and here's. That was so much fun, Troy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm glad that we were able to provide two very different kinds of experiences. Both Joe's piece and the Piazzolla have rhythmic energy and have a kind of vivacity to the energy of them that is bewitching and engaging. But yeah, that Piazzolla was just a gas and lots of fun for us to be able to include.
Oh, well, yeah. Thank you once again for having me do that concert. We got some lovely comments on it. Thank you, Eric Coley and Fred Emery and April Dixon, for listening and commenting. And everybody, we love having you here with us. Do share your comments and questions for Troy Peters, and know that this live stream does stay up. So you can, if you're joining, you could watch it from the beginning after, or share it with your friends and all of that. But yeah, being with you in San Antonio was really interesting for me. Of course, San Antonio being very different from Philadelphia in terms of the Latino community as a majority city. I think around 60% Latino population. Philadelphia, of course, is much less, but very substantial. And that's actually the impetus for my Dos Sueno Ensemble's Música en tus Manos project, or Music in Your Hands, which we've been doing since 2012, when the Latino communities of Philadelphia were around 12.6% of the population. And it's definitely grown by a few percent since then. And so it was very kind of interesting, instructive to be with you, and to see how you bring that community into the programming, for example, of YOSA in kind of interesting ways that we work on as well, with our focus on Latin American composers and Latino composers in the US, and also chamber and popular music. So chamber, not orchestra, but those similarities were just really great to explore with you and learn from.
I think it's so important for us to just keep learning new repertoire, keep being open to new audiences, keep being open to new collaborators. And just this last couple of weeks, I've had this incredibly varied diet of music that I've been engaged in, with presenting a new piece by Kenji Bunch that was written for YOSA and was absolutely gorgeous piece about his admiration for young musicians going through the COVID pandemic. This magnificent Japanese American composer who has a real connection to vernacular styles, folk styles, rock styles, all kinds of things. But he's a Juilliard trained, like, amazing violist and artist who, like, really weaves together things in an incredibly powerful way. I was involved in a Cinco de Mayo concert for the San Antonio Philharmonic that featured the Guadalupe Dance Company we saw a little while ago. And that featured a wonderful San Antonio singer-songwriter, Azul Barrientos, singing in Spanish, her own songs, and also traditional Mexican songs. I was involved in this. We have this crazy event in San Antonio called Fiesta that's sort of our Mardi Gras. I was involved in the conducting the full orchestra for the coronation of the Duchesses of Fiesta, which is a sort of a fancy debutante ball, but with a whole bunch of interesting traditions and histories woven into it. And so anyway, for me, like, that's part of what this is about. Is I'm not from around here, but I've been here 14 years, and I want to learn. I want to be part of this community and pull together as many different threads as I can to connect people to each other, and so that ultimately, I have this secret agenda that I want more people to love Brahms. But it's not just about Brahms. It's about respecting and admiring whatever music we're coming into contact with. I grew up listening to so many different things. I didn't come from a classical music family. So I grew up listening to rock and roll and popular music. And I came to classical music through public school and through youth orchestra. And so for me, I was never taught a kind of a hierarchy of this music is better than that music. I have come to find there are things that ultimately last and have more power. And I think that's a real thing. But even those are not all in one style or all in one genre or all in one instrumentation. I think there is great timeless music in so many different styles. Pardon me. So a lot of my work throughout my career has been about being open to that, about being open to collaborations with artists from other styles, about trying to bring my own background as a rock musician into what I'm doing as a classical musician, trying to teach classical musicians to listen more to how drummers work, which I think is actually one of the major problems in our classical training, that we don't think like rock drummers or jazz drummers enough. And you can play, I really believe you can play Bruckner better by listening to Led Zeppelin. This is not a joke. Like, I really believe that there are things we have to learn about pulse and time from engaging with other styles, or about when to breathe, or about how to phrase by listening to Billie Holiday, in addition to listening to great instrumentalists, or by listening to Beyonce. You know, that there are things that artists do in other styles that we can steal from, that we can learn from, that we can incorporate into what we're doing in a way that's respectful and enriches our own musicianship. So.
Absolutely. Actually, that's sparking so many thoughts and reactions, because when you're talking about how, as classical musicians, we can learn from rock drummers, we can even learn from our classical percussionist colleagues when we do certain rhythmic things or rubatos that they're not quite approving of. But yeah, and actually our great percussionist in Dolce Suono Ensemble is Gabriel Globus Honig, who went to Curtis on percussion and specializes in Latin and jazz, and has spent a lot of time in Latin America, and is the founder of People of Earth, a Latin fusion ensemble that we've done some collaborations with. And I call him my improv coach, because he really is. But absolutely on that one. And then also, just in terms of learning from pop musicians, my teacher, Julius Baker, the legendary flutist, always said, listen to Frank Sinatra for how he breathes and phrases. So yeah, I love this cross-pollination across different genres. So important.
It's so important, because I think in our training, we are so reliant on the eye and the memory of what we're told or what's modeled for us, that we don't engage our ears as much as we should. And that's not true for everyone, but I think that's true for many of us in our training. And, I had the great good fortune to collaborate pretty extensively for several years with Trey Anastasio from the rock band Fish. And it was an eye-opening experience to sit down with him when we were writing orchestral music. He was writing orchestral music, and I was sort of his scribe and orchestrator and occasional editor. But really, he was sitting there and singing to me these lines where he'd be playing his guitar and singing counterpoints, and I'd be desperately trying to keep up. And I've got a pretty good ear, but it really taught me that, like, someone who has spent his whole life living in the world of the ear has more fluency than I did at the time with just hearing how these lines combine and getting them down on paper as quickly as possible. And yeah, I mean, it was just such a gas and a thrill to have that, because you come out of Curtis and think, I'm pretty good at this. I went to the world's best conservatory and I learned a whole bunch of stuff, and now I know what I'm doing. And then, to have someone who can barely read music teach you things is incredibly eye-opening and powerful. I learned so much through that process.
That is amazing. We're going to listen to that in a second. And yeah, that story makes me think, okay, everybody pay attention in dictation class or solfege class.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Taking that down.
There's so many times these days where I'm handed what used to be a cassette tape. These days it's a WAV file or an MP3 file. And it's like, I've got to create an orchestration very quickly. And I can sit and like plunk things out on the piano, but it's much better if I'm hearing how harmonies are functioning and how melodies, which I can do, but I've had to work hard to get more fluent with that and to do it more quickly, because I think in our training, it's not, at least it's not the way I was trained. I was trained to start from what does the ink say, right? And in orchestra land, that's important. Play the ink matters a lot, right? We don't want to ignore what the composer has given us at all. But sometimes that means our ears are less open than they should be.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating. Let's put some of that on your collaboration with Trey Anastasio, and then maybe we can talk about it a little bit after we hear it. Okay, here we are. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing this. Seis de Mayo by
Yeah,
Terence.
this piece is a piece called the In-Law Josie Wales for acoustic guitar and string quartet.
Mhm.
And in this recording, the Ying Quartet, which is a wonderful ensemble of four siblings, most of whom went to Eastman,
Oh.
really great string quartet. But we actually originally workshopped the piece with youth orchestra students. And so it was an element of Trey having a solo guitar piece, me working with him to create a string arrangement, and then having the youth orchestra musicians actually collaborate with him a little bit on adjusting and improvising. And it was really a process where their voice was part of what happened there. Um,
That's
and
that's
that
phenomenal.
has been, yeah, it was really fun. And it honestly, like, I'm especially proud of that journey that I've went on with Trey of he now for the last 20 years has been doing orchestral concerts and shows up and plays with the New York Philharmonic and the LA Phil and all kinds of groups. And he's worked with other folks, other orchestrators, in addition to the work that he and I did. But I was part of the beginning of that journey and of really introducing him to the world of the orchestra and opening that door. And I think he's created some really fascinating things. And like I say, I learned a lot through that process. So it changed a little bit about how I arrange, a little bit about how I compose in my own music, but especially the way I think about orchestration and arranging. I learned a lot from that process. So.
Wow. Well, I was just going to ask you a little bit more about your composition, but hearing what you've been up to recently, not just how do you have time for your arrangements and composition, but how do you have time to sleep, right?
Well, I mean, I think that's a journey for all of us
Yeah.
right, that like we've all got. I do have the advantage that in the university and the youth orchestra world, we live with a pool of repertoire for longer. And so, when I'm preparing a major work at the university or with the youth orchestra, we rehearse it for 10 weeks or in the youth orchestra, or 5 weeks in the university. And so you have more time to really inhabit orchestral repertoire. But I'm also doing lots of professional concerts, and so sometimes the stack of scores behind me gets really big. But I still write a little bit. I write a lot less than I used to, but I write when people ask me to. I write for opportunities that come along, and occasionally I write because I'm inspired. But I'll be honest, like, not a lot. I mean, I write when people ask me to write things, and so and I also, a lot of my writing energies these days actually goes into, I'm in a folk rock band, and so I the arranging and songwriting sort of takes care of some of that impulse for me. And then orchestration and arranging is project based. I do a lot of responding to opportunities to collaborate where we need charts, and so I'm sometimes the one creating those arrangements, and I really enjoy doing that. So.
That is really interesting. And actually, one thing you said really resonates with me about how youth orchestras or collegiate orchestras rehearse programs for longer. And I will never forget my youth orchestra at New England Conservatory in Boston doing Dvorak 7, and we probably rehearsed it for months or all semester. And I remember just playing the first flute part with my first oboe friend and colleague in the youth orchestra, our parts, like we played the entire symphony as a duet from memory. And, if you want to be a musician, you never get that kind of time again. And it's really, really so important to have that in school, to really spend time with repertoire. And then it's like at Curtis, my first Beethoven 5 with conductor Otto Werner Müller, we studied it so hard. And part of it was just the type of rigorous orchestral training he did with us at Curtis at that time. But we got to really learn the score so well in a way that if you have a professional career, you never really get to rehearse as much or that kind of thing. So yeah, those moments are so important, those experiences. It's one of my favorite things about youth orchestra. And actually, while we're talking, in fact, about Curtis and tradition, you studied composition there with Ned Rorem, and then with George Crumb at the University of Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
So I would just love it. I mean, what was it like to study with them? And especially you were with them kind of, they were in their prime throughout their extended lives, I think, as musicians and educators and thinkers and really pioneers too, in many ways. But yeah, what was it like to study with Rorem and Crumb, two very different composers, two very iconic figures?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the thing that I always reflect on is that they're two of the 20th century's greatest American composers of vocal music in extremely different styles and extremely different approaches to writing vocal music. Their pedagogy was less different than you might expect because both of them were very focused on unleashing the voice of the person they were working with. So they weren't, neither of them were doctrinaire. Neither of them was trying to get me to sound like them. Both of them were people who were, in some ways, like great editors, which I think is a lot of what music composition instruction really is serving as an editor for your students, serving as someone who asks them tough questions that make them make better choices in their music. And they both did that for me. They both taught frequently by looking at models. And so with Crumb, it was mostly Mahler. And with Rorem, it was mostly French music. But it was, in both cases, it was not exclusively those things. And one of my favorite moments studying with George Crumb was that a moment when he pulled down the score for Copland's Third Symphony, which was a piece that Rorem had pulled out and looked at the score with me a couple of times when I was studying with Ned, that Ned Rorem would pull down the Third Symphony and look at some orchestrational questions. And so when George pulled out the score for the Copland Third Symphony, and I said, Ned used to do the same thing, he laughed and said, "Oh yeah, Ned knows what he's talking about." So they were fascinating, very different, but very wonderful voices. And ultimately, they're both people who, like I say, kind of helped me find who I am. I have colleagues who studied with both of them. Jennifer Higdon, of course, being the person who may be best known, who although she didn't take lessons with Ned, she was mentored by Ned and she studied with George. And she was, she was part of that Curtis Penn nexus. And there are a couple of other composers who did that. And I think we were all very fortunate to have that sort of confluence of compositional genius in Philadelphia that was going on in the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Combination of voices.
Absolutely. And for me as a flutist, they've all written iconic works, and especially for flute, cello, piano trio, like my Dolce Suono Trio Ensemble. I first played Rorem's trio when I was a Curtis student for him, and sent him recordings over the years live from our performances. And he would always write a handwritten note to us. I mean, such a gentleman. And both of them were. I mean, knowing Crumb was so fantastic. He came to as guest composer to a Dolce Suono Ensemble concert early on, where we did his Voice of the Whale, Vox Balanai, and it was just really thrilling to have him there and to have him coach us and to keep that connection. So it's so exciting that you studied with them. And then later we commissioned Jennifer, our mutual friend, to write a trio for Dolce Suono Trio as well, American Canvas, kind of joining that repertoire. So I get very excited when I hear stories of Rorem and Crumb from people like you who got to study with them. It's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the joy of being part of the Curtis family that you get connections to all of these traditions and elements. Even, I didn't know Samuel Barber. I was 11 years old when he died, but there were enough, his voice still resounded at school, and I studied with people who knew him. And so I got to follow Giancarlo Menotti around and be his personal assistant during a Curtis opera production. And so you get these threads that tie you. I mean, the night that Leonard Bernstein died, I was the person who told Isaac Stern that Bernstein had died, because it happened on a night where Stern was playing with the Curtis Orchestra, and I found out, and we didn't all have smartphones to deliver the news backstage, right? And so I literally ran to the Academy of Music to spread the word, and one of the people I told was Isaac Stern. And so that it's just that is part of being in that world. That's what I always tell to my students, that wherever you go to school, you want to try to inhabit that world, and don't, the old guy in me says, don't take it for granted. Of course, when I was there, I took it for granted, but there's so much that comes from swimming in that water with other people who are part of that vibe, and who whose careers and music making will continue to intertwine with yours. That's part of why, the Michelle Can is coming. Part of why I invited you to San Antonio is like, we have these shared reference points, even though we were there not quite at the same time. We have mutual friends, we have mutual experiences, and it means we speak a similar musical language that makes collaborating easy and fun.
It sure does. And especially if you think of the Rorem tradition stretching back to Barber, it was definitely something that we felt at Curtis even decades later, just because of that tradition and lore and everything. But that's amazing that you assisted Minotti. Was it a performance of one of his own operas?
Yes, Curtis did a double bill of The Medium and Amelia Goes to the Ball in the late 80s. And I was a young composition student, and they needed somebody to sit with a yellow legal pad and take notes. And he was directing, and so I was his note taker, and of course I picked up all kinds of legend and lore and Italian swear words. It was a fascinating experience.
All you need, right? Give a good performance. That's amazing. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, as you mentor so many generations of musicians, well, not so many. I'm not saying you've been around a little.
I mean, the hair is pretty gray at this point.
No, but I mean, as a youth orchestra conductor and mentor, when you have students or even your college students coming forward who might want a career in music, maybe on their instrument or maybe following in your footsteps as a conductor and composer, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think there are two things. One is you'll never have more time than you have right now. When you're an undergraduate student, you feel like you're busy, but you have no idea how much less busy you are then than you will be later. And so it's really easy to waste time when you're an undergraduate student. And you need to carve out time for yourself. But you have this resource that you can look at every score in the world, and you can listen to rehearsals by guest artists, and you can go to things. And so even on the nights when you're tired and want to just zone out and stream something on Netflix, you should go to the student recital and learn more repertoire. You should go to the library and sit and look at scores. And it's actually, I got this advice from Pavel Jarvi when I was brand new at Curtis, and he said, listen to music and look at scores. And I sort of would have done that anyway, but I spent hours and hours and hours and hours looking at scores. 20 years later, when I first moved to San Antonio, I got a phone call asking me to come to the San Antonio Symphony and rehearse the Stravinsky Symphony in C on 45 minutes notice. And it was a score I had spent 3 hours with when I was 21. And so because I had spent 3 hours with it when I was 21, I was not scared to get on the podium and lead a professional orchestra in a rehearsal on this piece. And what that did for me was then I conducted that orchestra another 100 times over the next decade, because I was able to survive a rehearsal of Stravinsky Symphony in C. I'm not saying it was brilliant, but I was able to get some work done and, not make any mistakes that the musicians caught. And like that only happened because when I was 19 and 20 and 21, I was a sponge sucking up repertoire. I think for all of us, when we're 19, 20, 21, be a sponge, learn as much as you can, learn things that you don't think you need. If you're a flutist, go to the clarinet recital and the bassoon recital and the trumpet recital and the violin recital. Don't just go to the flute recitals, because there's so much that you can learn from your colleagues. And there's so much out there that if you get it all stowed away, you'll be able to pull it out and use it at various times. And it's been a lifesaver for me.
That's a great story with Symphony in C. Not an easy piece to go out even on 3 hours studying.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it for another 40 minutes right before I walked on the podium. So
that's amazing. But the advice is so great. I mean, yes, as a flutist, we're one-line players. We're always just part of something unless it's a solo flute piece. And that's very similar to the advice that I give young musicians and my students, just to listen as broadly as possible. Orchestra, vocals, strings, other winds, go to those concerts as you're seeing, but also just try to be as educated, as broad a thinker as possible, studying academics and other art forms, and that will just make you a richer artist. Or let's say if you don't go into the arts, you go into another field, the arts will feed into that as well, because of course, to be a musician as a professional, it takes so much work and some luck, and it's a tough business. So having that passion is so key. I mean, you have to love it to want to work hard at it.
I would add one similar element is like there's when we first start to swim into the world of people who are serious about this thing at a high level, cynicism can be a part of the picture. There can be a lot of judging and dismissing and saying, "Oh, this is terrible and this is not good enough." And it's valuable to learn how to make judgments, but being open to and embracing of as many things as possible. There's much to learn. Like, don't dismiss things. Don't decide you're better than things. Learn, learn, learn. When I was 19, I thought the Franck D minor symphony was a terrible piece. And now I'm smarter and I know that I have a lot to learn from that piece. It's still not my favorite, but I was wrong when I was 19. I thought I knew more than I did.
I think of that from my brother's youth orchestra at New England Conservatory in Boston. It was Youth Philharmonic Orchestra with Ben Zander doing the Franck. And I will never forget the Franck because I heard it every week going to his rehearsals, or when he rehearsed with Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra and AGUA. And they went on tours to Japan and then Europe, Chile. It was really amazing. But even just listening to those pieces helped me learn them so much. So I think I just love talking about your approach with you and what you're giving the members of youth orchestras of San Antonio in terms of this in-depth but also very diverse approach to repertoire, which is fantastic. And before we say goodnight, we have one more clip that you sent me, which I want to just share because it kind of embodies this. It's the Elizondo. And if you give a tiny introduction, we'll just put a clip of that one on. Troy.
Yeah, Jose Elizondo is a wonderful Mexican-American composer I met 25 years ago. He is a software engineer who lives in Boston, but he's from Chihuahua and has written a whole bunch of really dynamic and engaging music that's really based in Mexican folk music. And this is a piece I've done dozens of times.
Awesome. We'll have a taste. fantastic. Sounds terrific. And they sound terrific. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mimi.
That's a delightful piece. I should check out more by this composer.
He's got some really good flute music too. Actually, he's got. Sefika Kudlur has recorded quite a bit of his and performed quite a bit of his music, and he's really he's somebody who makes his living as a software engineer, but who has a real gift and kind of organic sense of form and like lovely music that is really rewarding to explore.
Wow, qué maravilla. Es un gran placer hablar contigo. I'm just saying hello. Buenas noches a todos que hablan español esta noche. Y ahora escuchamos una obra de Elizondo, tocada por Troy Peters, el director de YOSA, Youth Orchestras of San Antonio. So a little greeting for the Spanish speakers who might be hearing, and certainly some of your fans in San Antonio. But yeah, in kind of that piece also exemplifying what we were talking about of musicians who do other things or people who also contribute to the music world. So that's really great. But Troy, I have to thank you so much for sharing of your marvelous artistry and expertise and ideas with everybody this evening. Thank you so much. It's also great to see you and kind of go over our fun performance this fall.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to see you and be part of this conversation.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for listening and for your lovely comments. Ronnie Gordon, Mom, thank you for that. Victor Coco, thanks for the thanks. And Fred Emery, really appreciate what you've written. Thomas, great having you here. You can share this after. Everybody, please visit my website. Under projects, there's a list of Tea with Mimi episodes, so you can go through and go over and watch whichever ones you want to do. Also, Dolce Suono Ensemble just finished our season, but we release our concerts virtually. If you would like to subscribe that way, we also are celebrating next season devoted to our marvelous commissioned works. Dolce Suono Ensemble has given 66 world premieres since 2015, and 2005 actually, and we're gonna represent a bunch of them next season. So you can see that on dolcesuono.com as well, and follow Troy Peters and his activities. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much, Mimi.
Thanks so much, Troy. See you soon. Talk to you soon. Great having you here. Bye.